Welcome to Monday Night Live, and we really are live. And this time, we're not going to screw this up. And it was technical difficulties beyond our control, including my own stupidity. But this is the weekly, no longer new, aspiring to be viral YouTube show from the staff at Inside ND Sports and the Rivals Network. I'm Eric Hansen. As far as I know, he's still Tyler James. Our recruiting writer, Kyle Kelly, is probably laughing his butt off somewhere and also doing his recruiting thing with some great updates in our Insider Lounge from a significant recruiting weekend. Tonight, Tyler and I will break down Notre Dame's 16-14 implosion against Stanford and spin it forward into what it means for the rest of the season. We'll also take your questions and venting, and we're going to do that earlier in the show than usual. Now, easy on the venting, but we do welcome all questions.
All right, Eric. As we tried to set up earlier, we did get a chance to talk to Marcus Freeman today on Monday at his annual weekly press conference, and we wanted to get your takeaways from it. What was your first headline from today's press conference with Marcus Freeman?
You know, the thing that Marcus said that really surprised me was how much he felt it was imperative for him to have his own coaching blueprint. I felt like, Brian Kelly won a lot of games at Notre Dame, all-time winningest coach. These guys worked together for a year, and that he'd maybe cherry pick some things from Brian Kelly. But in a sense, it was going to be a rebuild year for Marcus, not hoping not to have a rebuilding record, but really starting from scratch, really not taking very much of what Brian Kelly had established in terms of a coaching blueprint, which really kind of was contradictory to what Jack Swarbrick, the athletic director, felt like was one of Marcus's strengths going into hiring him, was the continuity. And I do think there's some continuity, but there's a lot more starting over than I ever envisioned.
All right. To be frank, I wasn't paying really close attention to that because I was making sure that all the links were fixed and everything was out there. So rather than respond to your first headline, I'm just going to pitch to.
I did a darn good job of being complete with that. So we'll move on to number two.
All right, give us your second headline, and I'll pay attention this time. I promise.
The second headline is more of an observation than a headline. It's Marcus Freeman is incredibly candid for a guy that's kind of going through some growing pains. And a couple of examples that I'll single out is him mentioning the 4th and 2 play, and it was in your top 6 plays in your post game story that shaped the 16-14 loss. The 4th and 2 from the 5-yard line late in the first quarter when they had Jaden Thomas run a jet sweep into an overloaded Stanford defense where there were unblocked defenders. Now, Marcus admitted that right before the play went off, Tommy Reese up in the booth, offensive coordinator, said, "This is not the look we wanted, shoot." And Marcus said, let's run it anyways. And it was a disaster and ended up being a 0-yard gain. Notre Dame didn't get any points in the first half against the number 109 defense in the country at the time. So that was really interesting that he was willing to share that detail. The other thing that was kind of interesting was what he did after his press conference. He went to his office, he watched the game over by himself, and then the next day he watched it with his staff, and that's where he was able to glean some answers. And then he watched the game, I think, a couple more times. But just his process, how candid he is with it, is really something that was a big takeaway for me. And it also, I think, is a sign of both his kind of resiliency and his openness, as a sign of a first-year coach that is starting to get it, at least from an attitude standpoint. I'm not saying his X's and O's will be better this Saturday, but certainly a guy that would have been defensive, you might have expected that from a first-year coach, and I really think that only kind of prolongs the process. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think Marcus Freeman went into the season with a good perspective, and I think understanding of that there's not a lot you can say in the post-game press conference after a loss, especially embarrassing ones, be them against Marshall and Stanford, that are going to satisfy people.
Right.
I mean, a certain segment of the fan base, they want people fired. That could be the only thing you could say that would satisfy them. Or maybe even you resign on the spot or something like that. But obviously none of that stuff is happening. So I think it's a fine line you have to try to balance of, okay, I want to take the blame, but obviously, like, not everything is his fault. Like, sometimes players need to execute better. Sometimes coaches need to be coaching better. And if you say something about a player, someone might say, well, you're throwing him under the bus. Or if you say something about a coach, it's like, wow, you're throwing him under the bus. And so, I mean, it can be difficult. And that's why losing is not fun, because everything that comes with it is more difficult. It's harder from the questions you get asked, the questions you have to answer, the reactions to how you answer those questions. Everything is sort of picked apart after a loss, and especially after 3 losses in 6 games so far to start Notre Dame's season. So I think I appreciated that candor. We've been talking about whether or not what the communication level is and how Notre Dame staff is learning to work with each other. And my question would be sort of in that moment, it's like, how adamant was Tommy and like, this isn't going to work? Or was it more just a comment of like, oh crap, this isn't going to work? Like, he was nervous about it. We don't really know exactly how that is communicated, what's communicated, and if it was said strongly enough to like try to get Marcus to call a timeout, or if he just decided on his own. It's like, no, we're fine. We'll just give this a try. I think regardless, it wasn't exactly a great play call. Even if Notre Dame got the right look, I don't think it put Notre Dame's best players in the best position to try and get a crucial play. And so I think that was an unfortunate result, and I think probably an unfortunate play call that I'm not sure that even. I mean, I'm sure in a certain circumstance it could have worked, but I think you want to eliminate as much of the could from the equation when you're going for it on 4th and 2. It's something that, hey, this will work regardless of what the defense does. This is going to work. We just have to go out and do it. And so that's what I would be trying to eliminate in those scenarios. And maybe Notre Dame will learn from that moving forward.
Well, and that's the hope that he pointed that out, I think, was him saying, okay, next time it will be a timeout. Next time I see that situation, rather than saying, just step on the gas and let's do it. I think the play, and you mentioned this, that it was flawed in its design. I would say in its personnel.
Right.
I can think of a lot more people besides Jaden Thomas I'd want running a jet sweep. So yeah, it was an ill-fated play. Notre Dame was 2 of 4 on 4th downs, which makes them 4 of 10 on the season. And they have not been below 500 on their 4th down since 2013. You could say, well, Tommy Rees was the quarterback that year, but the other year that he was a starting quarterback, he was perfect 6 for 6 in 2011.
All right, Eric, what is your third headline from Marcus Freeman's press conference earlier Monday?
The third headline has to do with Drew Pine bouncing back, or at least that's what Marcus Freeman said. I thought it was interesting because there were a lot of questions about Drew's swagger last week and his confidence, and even Marcus Freeman said, boy, the guy always comes to practice confident. That's the one thing you don't have to worry about. And it was clear in this game that he lost his confidence. And I think it snowballed into some more skittish play, later in the game. And I think that's a learning point for Marcus, and I guess to a certain extent for Tommy Rees, who's been his quarterback's coach and the offensive coordinator as well, is, they needed to be aware of that loss of confidence. I guess the good news is that Drew, kind of was in the right frame of mind in practice Sunday, apparently. And that's a good sign. But, he was 13 of 27 for 151 yards and a touchdown. He had a fumbled snap, which he recovered. He had another fumble that he didn't recover. He got sacked during the 2-minute drill, really didn't run that very efficiently. So he plummeted in the pass efficiency rankings, in the completion percentage rankings nationally, where he was among the leaders in the country, and probably plummeted in some people's thoughts about who should be the quarterback next year, but we'll be playing that game for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's a good reminder of just how quickly things change. I even mentioned, I think I mentioned it last week, of like how a few weeks ago we were talking about whether or not Notre Dame should have taken a transfer, and that Drew Pine shouldn't have been in the position to be the backup. And then he goes out and has some good games. It's like, man, they really figured this out. And then now it's like, wait a minute, now we're back to square one. What exactly is this offense with Drew Pine leading it? I think sometimes, like, I understand the perspective of athletes and quarterbacks projecting confidence, saying that they're always confident in themselves, even if they're not, if that's not always the case. There was something we talked to Ian Book so many times over his 3 years as a starter that he insisted all the time that his confidence was never shaken. He's always confident. And I just don't, I mean, I haven't been that level of an athlete, so maybe they are just extremely confident all the time. But I find that hard to believe. There's doubt has to come into your minds at times when you're not playing well. You're trying to figure out why that is. And so when you're trying to figure those things out, your confidence is going to be shaken in some way. And so I think it's okay to admit that. I understand if they don't want to admit that, but I think it needs to sort of be understood to figure out, okay, this is why we're not playing well. I need to be confident in these throws I'm making and these decisions I'm making. And I don't think you can be confident in the decisions you're making if you've made the wrong decisions. Because it's like, well, wait a minute, why did I do that? I thought I did everything I was taught to do, and it still led to this situation. So I think it's just not realistic for guys to be 100% confident all the time, even when it's someone like Drew Pine, who is very confident, rallies guys around him, and is going to do his best to not show his teammates if he is losing confidence. He wants to be, hey, we're going to go back out there and get it. That's fine. You could be that, but you also sort of have to understand what's going on and being able to adapt. And I don't know that you're always going to be 100% confident all the time. And Notre Dame has to figure that out, even if Drew is saying he's confident and doesn't seem like he's dealing with confidence issues. If it's not being reflected on the field, Notre Dame has to sort of figure that out and sort of adjust and figure out a ways to get him more confident or be able to play more confidently, even if he's necessarily saying that he is confident. All right, Eric, what was your next headline from Marcus Freeman's press conference?
My next headline was the personnel updates. There were some injury updates, which I'll get to, but I want to start with Mitchell Evans rejoining the depth chart this week. He actually played 19 plays in the game on Saturday night. Notre Dame did not include him in the depth chart, but I think that was just an oversight. I think they just get used to putting the same people in the same places most of the time. But I think that this is a kind of a significant development because coming out of spring, I think Mitchell Evans was the guy that Notre Dame thought would be Michael Mayer's sidekick, that he would be the number 2 tight end. And getting him back with half the season left, I think it will benefit Notre Dame a lot. Those freshman tight ends, they're still going to play. They played less in this game, so did Davis Sherwood. But I think Mitchell Evans brings a level of experience. He can block. He can catch the ball. I think they're pretty excited about him. I think it's going to be a really interesting race between Eli Reardon and Mitchell Evans to see who becomes tight end number 1 next year when Michael Mayer's doing it for money. But so he was back. And then some of the injured guys, I think the most significant one that may not play is Jason Adamalola. He had a rib contusion. So Marcus didn't rule him out for Saturday's game, but I think we'll probably know more on Thursday whether he was able to practice this week. Fortunately, it wasn't a structural problem with him, which would have been a longer-term injury.
Right.
So that's his status. Jaden Mickey, who's a backup cornerback, didn't play in Saturday's game because of an abductor strain, and he is listed as day-to-day. I doubt he plays this week, but he did not practice on Sunday. The good news is Tariq Bracy, who is the number one nickel and really Notre Dame's most consistent corner by far this year, missed the Stanford game with a hamstring. He did practice Sunday, so to have him back will be key against UNLV. Am I missing anybody? Ramon Henderson had an ankle turn in the game, and he was practicing Sunday, so he's fine, and he's a valuable piece. He was one of the fill-in nickels. Usually it has been Jaden Mickey. I don't think we're going to see him at nickel the rest of the season. I think they're committed to have him play field corner anyways. So the backups are Clarence Lewis and Ramon Henderson there.
Yeah, I think we saw the impact not having Tariq Bracy has on the defense, and that shouldn't be surprising to anyone given the way he has played this season. That was certainly unfortunate. Ramon Henderson dealing with the ankle issue even hurt more because the nickel defense was really limited without both of those guys.
And then you had Kim Hart and Morrison playing 82 snaps apiece.
Yeah, those guys had to play a lot. You're playing Clarence Lewis as a nickelback in certain situations, and I don't think that is the best use of his skill set. So
Stanford thought the same thing. They went after
him. That was certainly so. It's certainly good news that Ramon Henderson and Tariq Bracy are probably back in the lineup against UNLV. I'm not sure necessarily that they're needed, but I don't know that Notre Dame's in a position to be resting guys with the way the season has gone. They need guys to get out there and play and make plays. And really bring some swagger back to this program, because I think that's one of the things that has lost it with the way the season has gone. In terms of Jason Adamalola, I think which is certainly not. There's no guarantee that he will play this week. I think I did some poking around it. I think the hope is that he can practice on Wednesday, as long as that rib issue isn't giving him a ton of pain and everything is healed good well for him. So that would certainly be a help. Notre Dame has sort of been decimated in the middle with Howard Cross dealing with the high ankle sprain, and then losing Jacob Lacey. That's just a bad turn of events for Notre Dame at a position that was really good going into the season and has left them a bit vulnerable in the last few games. And then as for Mitchell Evans, I understand the high hopes for him, and I sort of agree that he can be the number 2 tight end in this offense. I was a little surprised by the amount that he played in his first game back. I thought they counted on him a little bit more than I would have guessed, given that he was just coming off the injury and playing for the first time this season. So I don't know that was wise. And I think that anytime you're playing 2 tight ends, you're usually eliminating the odds of playing 2 running backs, and 2 running backs has been a pretty successful look for Notre Dame's offense. And so I was a little bit surprised by the lack of 2 running back sets that Notre Dame used against Stanford. I think it ended up being 3 in total for the whole game, and that included, I think there was one with 2 running backs and 3 tight ends, or 2 running backs and 1 tight end. I think there was a 2 running back, no tight end look too. So they used all kinds of different combinations, but they only did it 3 different times for the 2 running back sets. So that was not exactly ideal in my opinion. So that would be one of the things that I would criticize Ty Maurice for. And we'll be curious to see if we get an answer Tuesday when we talk to him of what went into the decision to use 2 backs as little as they did against Stanford's defense. All right, I think we got one more headline from you, Eric.
Yes, and it's keep it myopic. I asked Marcus Freeman today about, kind of what's the carrot out there for the team long term, because you're choosing between the Duke's Mayo Bowl and the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl, and there's not a lot of big stage opportunities for them. And I thought it was a pretty smart answer. He said, we're not even going to talk about that kind of stuff, what's out there in December and January. We're really going to focus on this week and not even talk about yet Saturday. We're going to focus on practice one day at a time. And I think that's probably the best thing, because really there aren't a lot of great alternatives. If Notre Dame won 6 games in a row, yes, they could get back into the New Year's 6 conversation, but I don't think that's realistic. And I think keeping it small picture rather than big picture was the smart thing to do. And speaking of pictures, I'm really proud of you guys for finding us again after we screwed up the first time today, because I see the question queue filling up. I know that there's one person in particular that has about 12 questions, but I see some of the other of you have found that. And Tyler will tell you how to submit your question, because we're going to do that next.
Yeah, if you are on a desktop and first make sure that you are watching us through YouTube's website or app. If you're watching us embedded on the InsideNDSports.com website or the Insider Lounge message board, you won't be able to submit comments for the chat. So make sure that you are either on
or at
the
least
YouTube.
Ones we can see.
Well, yeah, you can submit them, but we won't see them during the show. We'll try to get to them after, if that's the case, if somehow there are some mistakes there. But so once you get into YouTube on a desktop, the chat box should be to the right of the video, and just type it in. You should see other people commenting, and you can go ahead and submit questions there. Or if you are on a mobile device, I believe the chat box is below the video, so just down below, you just type right in. It should be pretty easy. So easy that even Eric could do it, even if he was here, even if he was hearing an echo while doing it. So remind me again what your fifth headline was, so I can respond to it.
Keeping it myopic, just small picture, not really worrying about what the carrot is out in the distance.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, I know, like, we will like to think of so after the loss, it's like, well, now Notre Dame might end up going 6-6 because you pencil in potential losses to Syracuse, Clemson, and USC, and you worry about, okay, well, are they going to go to a bowl? Does that change what our December schedule looks like? The players and the coaches, they can't worry about that. They got to go win games. It's also sort of related to the idea, like, everyone, like, well, now it's time for a youth movement. It's like, yes, you'd like to get an understanding for what you have in your program, but you can't just sort of give up and turn your back on these seniors that have given so much to the program, and like sort of take away opportunities for them as long as they're earning them. So I think that's sort of the balance that we don't necessarily always think of from the outside perspective, but from within the program, they can't worry about trying to play for something bigger than the next game or what that is beyond that. They're playing on a game-to-game basis. Marcus even wants them to focus practice, which is how it should be all the time. But especially when things are going wrong, you gotta get what you need to get done on a daily basis, and the rest will sort of take care of itself.
I want to add to, I mean, we're getting on a tangent, but I think it's a good tangent as far as the youth movement. One of the things I mentioned in my post-game column was, this has become as much about fixing things for 23 as it is for 22. Now, I made a point of saying this isn't about giving young players who haven't earned it an opportunity to get on the field, because I think you not only lose games, you lose your team if you do that. But what I felt like the coaching staff needed to do is, with guys like Prince Colley and Tobias Merriweather and some of the people that have had trouble getting on the field, a lot of the responses we've gotten is, well, they need to earn our trust in practice. But I also think it's a shared responsibility. I think the coaching staff needs to help those younger players that are really talented, like Tobias, get to the point where they can earn trust. Give them a part of the playbook that they can get right. And use them. And we saw that example Saturday night. And I know that a lot of people were like, why hasn't he been doing this all season? Malik Zaire said it on our podcast last week.
Exactly. Yeah. People were definitely pumped up to see Tobias Merriweather out there making a play, including his father. I don't remember exactly what he tweeted. Maybe it might've been just something like, oh my God. But I know that Tobias, his family have been waiting for him to get an opportunity and take advantage of it. And he certainly did against Stanford. So that was a cool moment for Notre Dame's offense, although he certainly gets overshadowed by the way the rest of the game went for Notre Dame. Well, Eric, we have a number of questions being submitted, so let's go ahead and get to some questions right now. If you have more questions as we're asking them, go ahead and keep submitting them. We'll try to get to as many as we can. The Golden Playbook has been submitting a lot of comments rather than questions, but we will go ahead and take one and sort of turn it into a question. The comment is, I know it's going to take some time, but I think if we give Marcus a chance, he's going to be better. Look at the way he's recruiting there. Great talent on the way. What are your thoughts on what this season so far says about Marcus Freeman and how much of how long of a leash he should get in terms of turning this program into what he thinks it can become.
Well, I mean, obviously he's got this year, but I mean, and next year, I mean, here's how I want to frame this. I think we know what Marcus Freeman can do from a recruiting standpoint, and that's something no other head coach at Notre Dame has been able to recruit at this level in a small sample size since Lou Holtz's regime. And this gives Notre Dame a chance to get past that 10-2, 11-1. We're maybe falling short of the playoff or just getting in it and then losing by 30. This gives them a chance to win a game at that level. Now, can Marcus be the sideline coach? Can he be the organizer? I think he has it in him. I mean, he's going to have to prove it to all of us. But I see a guy that is learning from his mistakes, that that certainly has the potential to get there. I would say, though, that I believe, this offseason is going to be really important for Marcus. I mean, he can get advice from people during the season, but you're so busy, you got so much going on. Really, this offseason is going to be important for his learning more about the offense, learning more when to not go for it on fourth down, learning when to call timeouts, learning to have better messaging. I mean, his messaging has been consistent, but I don't think it's been enough. I think that you have to have unique messaging each week that reflects the opponent and the part of the season that you're in. And I don't think that that's something he's had. Again, I think Marcus always aspired to be a head coach. I don't think he was preparing to be a head coach. And then it kind of fell into his lap of having this opportunity. I watched Marcus and Brian Daboll really closely because they both got big, high-profile jobs at the same time. Brian was a longtime assistant in the NFL. He even was with Nick Saban in Alabama as their offensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
I watched his press conferences, and he had everything laid out. He had his blueprint much more refined. I think a lot of Marcus was, hey, I've got to do this. It's kind of like flying the plane while you're still building it. But I do think that Marcus is eventually going to get this right. I think that he had a really bad day at the office on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really fascinating case study in sort of like the balance of what talent can do for you to win games and what coaching does for you to win games, because the talent that's on the field for Notre Dame this season isn't that vastly different than the talent that was on the field when Brian Kelly was coaching this program. Obviously, a lot of the players were here in previous seasons with Notre Dame. And certainly there's strengths and weaknesses to this roster. Obviously, we've discussed them at length, even going into the season, of what we thought the strengths and weaknesses would be. Some of those strengths maybe haven't been as strong as we thought they would be. Some of those weaknesses have been as weak, or maybe if not weaker than what we thought they would be. But I think you're seeing what happens when you're trying to figure out how to get the most out of your players on a game-to-game basis. And it's understandable that a first-time head coach maybe would struggle with that at times. You're looking at guys that in most of the other positions have they're not doing anything that different than what they've done before. Al Golden's been a defensive coordinator before. Tommy Rees has obviously been an offensive coordinator before. So those guys should be able to make adjustments. Certainly, I think Al Golden's probably dealing a little bit with like coming back to the college level, understanding what you can and can't do at the college level versus what you can and can do at the NFL level. And so I think there's some differences there. Tommy Rees having to adjust on the fly during the season for a different quarterback, maybe not understanding the strength of its offensive line to start the season, and going through that. So it's sort of fascinating to see. I do think long-term this should work for Marcus Freeman. There's certainly a lot of things that are not working the way they should right now. I think there is some concern, and I understand that about, yes, Notre Dame has a great recruiting class now, but it doesn't matter what they're ranked now. What will it be in December? Can they keep all these guys in the class? I think for the most part they're in good shape, but it's understandable to be worried about that. Things can certainly change. I think during the NIL era, especially. The dollar signs that could be thrown your way from other programs may be more attractive when you're maybe a little less convinced about the trajectory of the program, given the way this season has played out. So I think that it's going to be an interesting 2 months here to get to the early signing period. But Notre Dame has put itself certainly in a good position so far, has some obvious needs at the Viper defensive end spot, the quarterback spot, which obviously everyone's aware of that. But they do have a good number of really talented players. So we're seeing what he can do on the recruiting trail. And I think we won't necessarily see the impact of that, what's happening on the field necessarily for a while. Like maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe we don't see that till the offseason in the next recruiting cycle. If maybe there's more questions from the younger kids about what's going on. But right now, at least for the time being, it hasn't seemed to cost Notre Dame on the recruiting trail very much at all.
And I want to point out too, Brian Kelly was 1-3 in his first season at Notre Dame, and he had a lot of head coaching experience. Was 4-5 at one point, and then ended up winning the last 4 games of the season. So let's let the whole season play out. But believe me, I was venting, I guess. I don't know if venting's the right word, but when Papa John's pizza is the best part of the game, then it wasn't a very good game.
All right, let's go to our next question from Roger Lancey. Other teams are always going to be up when playing Notre Dame. It seems that ND plays to the level of the competition and not at their best each week. Do you see this as an area of concern for this team?
Well, I do. That's one of the things that Brian Kelly always talked about, was playing to the standard, not playing to your opponent. And it does feel like that. I know Tim Priester was trying to find out today from Marcus in the press conference whether it was a home and away thing. Is there too many things going on at a home game that kind of takes the wind out of you? And they played, the 3 road games were against 3 better teams, and they did much better, even though they lost the Ohio State game. They played Ohio State tougher than anybody has this year so far. Other teams are always going to be up for playing ND, but that's what you sign up for when you go to ND. You sign up to be that marquee game on the schedule. And certainly some of the past teams have handled that better than this one has to this point. But I think I think part of it is also the coaching. I think the coaching has been inconsistent to this point. So I won't put that all on the players.
Yeah, I think it can feel a little bit cliche, and especially if you're hearing it like on a weekly basis at a press conference, that, hey, we're Notre Dame, we're going to get the best from our opponent. But I do think there is something to that, especially when teams are coming into Notre Dame Stadium. It's a place that a lot of these teams don't play a lot. Now, obviously, that doesn't account for Stanford, but Stanford, that's a rivalry game, even if not everyone necessarily considers it a rivalry. But they're playing for a trophy. They know
they
each
won't
other.
Let their band come.
they know each other well, and Stanford really wants to win that game. Stanford had a lot to prove. It was going through a very tough stretch, and so it went out on Saturday and put an effort out there to beat Notre Dame and gain some respect back for the situation in the program. And so I think that you look at Marshall. Marshall comes in here, plays its best game of the season. Marshall hasn't looked like Marshall since it left Notre Dame Stadium, at least that version of Marshall. Now, certainly the way Notre Dame plays goes into that. Notre Dame has to be able to counter that. So I do think it is something that Notre Dame should be aware of. This isn't like a new phenomenon. Now, maybe it's something Marcus Freeman is maybe reckoning with to a greater level now than he did as a defensive coordinator here last season. But it certainly is something that Notre Dame has to figure out, because they have to know that they're going to get the best from their opponent on a weekly basis. All right, next question is from Aaron Stack. Question, do you guys know the defensive rankings for Notre Dame, rushing and pass defense? Now, I'm sure Eric can look those up quickly. I'm going to fill here for a little bit because I think that he probably doesn't have them at the tip of his fingers.
I do.
But I know he always has that at least close nearby.
It's real nearby. I do this every week. except that I didn't update it on my computer. So if you can give me just 1 second.
He was so confident. He was
I
Tyler, you can stop
have
talking.
it here on. I'm going to do it on my. I'm going to have to look down at my
We'll allow
legal
it.
pad here. Okay, so rush defense, they're 58th in the country. They actually moved up from 72nd last week, and we don't do pass defense because passing yards allowed doesn't reflect how good or how bad your pass defense is. Notre Dame's actually, I think, in the top 30 in that. In pass efficiency defense, they're 89th, and that's way lower than they're used to being. Total defense, they're 39th. Scoring defense, 36th. 27th in sacks. And third down defense is 68th. Here's the two that are really bad. Red zone defense, people almost always score on them in the red zone. They're 129th, and they're dead last in turnovers gained. They have not generated the turnovers that they practice so hard. I mean, we saw them doing that in August. They have special drills for ball security and knocking the ball loose, and it just hasn't happened in the game. The replay official had something to do with that in this last week's game, but they're certainly not faring very well. I will say this about the Stanford game. Stanford is a decent offense. They were a bad defense, but they've got an future NFL quarterback in Tanner McKee playing for them. Pro Football Focus even thinks he's a first rounder. They've got some good wide receivers. Their offensive line has been awful, and Notre Dame should have been able to get more pressure and jam the run a little bit more. But that was a season low in points for Stanford, 16. USC, I think Stanford scored 28 in that game. So the defense, I think, is improving and has the potential to improve much more.
Yeah, there's no good spin for the turnovers. Certainly they're creating some opportunities. I think that a little bit of bad luck with some of the fumbles that they're just not getting their hands on after it gets to the ground. But they also got to put themselves in a better position to be able to recover those. And then obviously like the replay that was overturned, I didn't think that was clear that it wasn't a fumble. So I was a bit surprised by that. As for the red zone, if you want to take the spin on that, they're not letting teams get to the red zone at an incredibly high rate. So that is allowing Notre Dame to keep opponents from scoring a lot because they're just not getting to their teams are having success when they get to the red zone, but they aren't necessarily getting to the red zone at a high rate. And I think they're pretty high up in terms of the least amount of red zone trips against them so far this season. All right, let's go to our next question from Bob Galvey. 6 games, 6 weekly game preps, 6 game plans with plays scripted, and 6 first quarters without a touchdown. Does Tommy Rees know how to put a game plan together without Brian Kelly's guidance? The UNC game is now an outlier, not the norm.
Well, that's a hard one to refute. When you think about why they haven't started strong, certainly the Ohio State game over time, Ohio State's defense has proven to be really good. And actually Marshall's defense in the rankings, even though they haven't beaten anybody of any substance since they played Notre Dame, their defense is fairly highly ranked. But even in the North Carolina game, it was a slow start. BYU was a slow start. I think some of it is those fourth down plays and some bad third down plays in the red zone that have hamstrung them. I'm really giving you a word salad here because I do think I think Tommy Rees had a bad week, and I'm trying to be fair to him because I think overall in the breadth of the season, I think he's done a pretty decent job. But that first quarter is baffling. They've scored 60 points in the second quarter and 6 in the first quarter. And so, I don't have a great answer for you other than that is a problem. I mean, that's got to get fixed. When you look at teams statistically, and some are tilted more than others this way, Brian Kelly had an incredible record when his team scored first and when he was leading at halftime. So did David Shaw. David Shaw was 81-8 when leading at halftime, and guess what? Now he's 82-8 because they were ahead 10-0. So getting off to a strong start is not overrated. It is very much rated where it should be. And this is something that is a big priority, I know, this week. So hopefully we'll have a different answer for you. I'm going to let Tyler take a crack at this because I don't know why it's been so bad in the first quarter.
Yeah, I mean, there's no really good excuse for that. Notre Dame has to be better. They have to. Marcus Freeman said something today about we got to start fast. We said earlier in the season we have to finish. We got to start fast. We have to get in the end zone. We have to have better. I think drive starters is something that they talk about. Now, I don't think I would need to do a more like thorough review of all the first quarters and what went wrong in those first quarters to determine like how much I thought it was play calling versus execution or the players failing to do what they're being asked to do. For instance, like the Cal game, it's like, well, everything was right there for Drew Pine to sort of do, and he was just not doing it. So I'm not really sure what I would have asked Tommy Rees to do differently to put Drew Pine in a better position than, because it wasn't like Notre Dame was asking him to make a lot of difficult throws in the start of the Cal game, and he just wasn't doing it. Certainly, you look at the first play of the game against Stanford, it's a false start. That's not a good way to start. That's not on the script. The script was not a false start for a first play. It seemed, and I think Marcus Freeman even indicated today that they went ahead and just ran the first play that they planned to either way today or Saturday. And when I watched it, I thought it was were they planning to do a draw on the first play of the game? That just doesn't make a lot of sense. Like a draw is usually when you're expecting a pretty heavy pass rush, and I don't know that the first play of the game would be something that would do that. So the first running play was a bit confusing. I also thought specifically to Stanford, since it's the most fresh on my mind, I was surprised how late we didn't see a Logan Diggs or Audric Estime carry in the entire first quarter. It was all Chris Tyree in the first quarter, and that was surprising to me. I didn't necessarily agree with that. I'm not really sure why that went that way. I'm curious I know it's been difficult, and even when it's been successful, it makes it look a little bit easier. What Tommy Rees has done in terms of getting all three of those running backs carries and touches, but I didn't think the way that they set up the offense with a lack of Diggs and Estime carries and leaning so heavily on Chris Tyree to start the game was the best way to attack Stanford's defense. So that was a bit surprising to me. So I think Tommy Rees knows how to do it, but he certainly isn't shown that he knows how to do it so far this season. I think he has to improve, and I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that any of his previous success is all due to Brian Kelly. But certainly I understand the criticism of the way things have gone so far this season. Another question from Ron Robert. He asks, Eric, I read your comment about the risk of playing youth over seniors. However, what does a poor team season do to highly rated freshmen who don't see the field?
Well, I mean, we're in a different era of this with the no waiting transfer portal. So I think players get itchier, but I do think you have to think about the team as a whole and team chemistry. And if you plug a freshman in there over an upperclassman that is somebody that's earned that spot, that's going to backfire on you as a coach. There's not going to be a trust from the players. They're going to think as soon as things get difficult, you're going to dump the people that have worked so hard and put themselves in the position and then go with a freshman. I do think I'm surprised that more freshmen haven't played or haven't put themselves on the verge of playing, and one thing that was different, I think, with Brian Kelly than Marcus is Brian would kind of map out the freshmen that he wanted to use on special teams for 4 games so he could get their feet wet. I don't think Marcus has prioritized that because Brian Mason wants to use starters and the best players possible on special teams. So there's not been a priority to work freshmen in those roles. And these games have been so close, most of them,
right,
that it's hard to get any reserves into the game that aren't already in a rotation. I mean, I thought Saturday night would be a great time to see some Steve Angeli. Well, it turned out that they couldn't afford to put him in a mop-up role because there was nothing to mop up.
Right.
But I do think that they do have to have a mindful eye toward freshmen that are physically ready and mentally ready. And we're going to see that, I think, eventually from Jalen Sneed at linebacker. And there may be a few others. We didn't see the tight ends right at the beginning of the season. I think we'll see them. We've certainly seen the freshman cornerbacks get involved. I don't know about some of the guys that have to physically transform themselves. Like Emil Wagner is a guy that could be a starting left tackle for a couple of years, but right now he's about 40 pounds too light. I think Tyson Ford looks the part, but I think he's just not ready yet. But I think he's a guy that could be a multiple year starter at defensive tackle. Heinish's little brother, I don't think he was ready to play at the college level like Kurt was when he surprised everybody as a freshman. So there's some people that I still hold out hope. And I do think, working some of them in special teams isn't a bad strategy. Like Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler. I think those guys need to be on special teams because I think it's going to pay off next year. And I don't think you're sacrificing a win or a loss. You're also not sacrificing a senior's playing time who's earned it. You're maybe keeping Brandon Joseph off the field a little bit more on a special team he doesn't need to be on. I'm not saying punt return, but if he's on other ones, I think that's a good middle ground, is getting some of those freshmen ready to go for special teams.
Yeah, the reality of the situation is that if you're a highly rated recruit as a freshman and you're not playing, it doesn't matter if the team's winning or losing. If you have a star in front of you, they're not used to that. So it's going to be an adjustment. Audric Estime was pretty honest with us earlier this season.
Yeah.
That someone asked, how has this gone for you in terms of what you expected? And he's like, to be honest, it wasn't what I was expecting. And he was a running back. He came here. He thought he was going to play as a freshman. He was behind Kyron Williams, who's a pretty dang good running back. Now, obviously, Logan Diggs was able to take advantage of that role later in the season when Chris Tyree was banged up. And Audric probably thought that could have been him rather than Logan. But so those guys are going to go through that, whether or not the season's going poorly or not. I think there has to be some reflection on, okay, why am I not playing? Is this in my control? Is this out of my control? And sort of dealing with that. It's a very hard adjustment for anyone who's expecting to play as a freshman and doesn't get to play. So certainly it doesn't help when the team isn't winning, because you're like, man, the guy that I'm behind isn't doing a great job. We're not winning. Why can't I get in there? But I do think that that isn't necessarily unique to this season. So it's about being clear with your players. The coaching staff has to be clear. Okay, this is why you're not playing. They can even make the point that, hey, we think we want to redshirt you this year to keep your eligibility extended. So we're not going to play you this season, but we're going to try 4 games that we can get you in. And sometimes I think Brian Kelly did it where sometimes it was like, okay, these are the 4 biggest games. We want to get you on special teams in these games. Or maybe these are the 4 games that we think we're going to be able to win easily, so we can get you some playing time. So we're going to carve out roles for you in these games. Notre Dame, I think, because of the way it's playing and losing, it's harder to sort of balance all of those things. Notre Dame has to do what it feels it has to do in order to win games right now. And so then you got to sort of rely on your relationships with the players that aren't playing and making it clear to them why they're not playing. And I think one benefit that Notre Dame does have is that, at least this is what kids tell us, most of the kids that stay, they came here for reasons beyond getting on the playing field. They came here for the degree. So even if they're not getting out on the field as they want to, they're getting a start on their academic career. They're being able to adjust to Notre Dame and being a student here. And a lot of those guys want to be here for the long run and to at the very least graduate from Notre Dame. So Notre Dame does have that working in their favor, but obviously that can work against them if someone feels a little bit overwhelmed and maybe I don't fit in here. Maybe I can't hang here. Maybe I can't get these academics, achieve the academic success that I thought I could.
It's not just the freshmen too. You got 2 sophomore tackles that are going to play in the NFL and probably be very high draft picks. If you're a year ahead of them, what are your chances other than an injury that you're going to play at all?
Right.
I mean, Tosh Baker, it took Blake Fisher getting poked in the eye to get 13 snaps, but those are the only 13 he's had this year. The same thing's going to happen at guard next year if Billy Schrauth ends up being as good as they think he is and fighting for a starting spot. He's going to be ahead of some people that are older than him, and that's going to be really difficult. And then they're going to have a decision to make in terms of whether that Notre Dame degree means more to them, or do they wait until they've graduated and then look for another place to play.
All right, Eric, let's get to one more comment, and then we can get back to some of the things that we wanted to discuss. This last one is from Nolan Sanchez. You would think the defensive and offensive play calling would be simplified so we could play Tobias Merriweather and Prince Colley more. Right? ?
Well, I think it's easier on offense to do that, especially at wide receiver. And we've talked about this before with Golden Tate when he was a freshman. Why couldn't you just say run Golden run and have certain plays for him? And yeah, there was the situation where they could only put him in a game if Notre Dame was kind of on the right hash mark near their bench, so they could give him instruction from the bench, and so that he would run the right play when he was a freshman. Then he ends up being a Biletnikoff Award winner by his junior year. But I think Tobias is so into the playbook, such a smart kid, so mature mentally. I think you could give him a set of plays that he could do really well. And with as thin as they are at wide receiver, and as unique as he is as an athlete at wide receiver at Notre Dame right now, you've got to make every effort for that to happen. We went through the same thing with Jordan Johnson. It turned out Jordan Johnson wasn't a 5-star player at all. He still hasn't had his first career catch at UCF, and he's been there 2 years. So he's just not been very good. But Tobias, that's not the case. Prince Colley, I think it's a little bit difficult because he missed a lot at the end of training camp with a concussion. And so that set him back. And yet I still think as he started to earn it, and Al Golden said last week when we were talking to him on Tuesday night, he had kind of a breakthrough practice, and we saw him play pretty well in the games that he's been in. So I don't know that you could simplify the game enough to, and I don't know that it's about simplifying it for him as much as it is him just catching up, experiencing things. Again, if the Marshall game had gone like it was supposed to and been a blowout, if the Stanford game had been like it was supposed to be and been a blowout, you could get more reps for these guys and not risk losing the game. So I think that's part of the problem. But certainly it's easier to do at certain offensive positions than it is at certain defensive positions.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see more of these guys. So I know this comment may be like, why is it taking this long to see them? But I do think we're going to see more of them. So I think that is a good thing for Notre Dame. I understand the idea is like, well, can't you just teach Tobias 3 routes and just have him run those? But I think if you do that, it's like, well, okay, so then teams are going to know, like, if Tobias Merriweather's in the game, this is what he's going to do.
It's like Daniel Smith, you knew it was a running play.
Right. So you're maybe not putting him in a winning position if you're only asking him to do one thing. It becomes a bit predictable. And then it's like, how fair is it to the other receivers you have on the team? It's like, well, certainly if Tobias Merriweather is your best post runner on the team, for instance, like, shouldn't Braden Lenzy get a chance to do that once or twice if he has to be out there for all the plays when he's not getting the ball? Shouldn't there be a play drawn up for him? Now, Tommy Reese expressed last week that Braden Lenzy is someone that's on his mind in terms of trying to get him the ball. And I think Notre Dame created some opportunities for him against Stanford and didn't necessarily come through on them. There was one touchdown that he should have had with a good throw from Drew Pine. I didn't like the reverse call that was a loss of 8 yards. But so I think Tommy may have gone a little bit too far out of his way and thought too hard about ways to get Braden Lenzy the ball. Now maybe Braden Lindsey would have been able to make that play happen at the 4th and 2 play. Maybe he's a better jet sweep player in a 4th and 2 situation than Jaden Thomas is. I'm not sure that play, the way it was executed and the way Stanford's defense played against it, I'm not sure that there was much anyone could do. I know there was like a hole there immediately, but that wasn't necessarily the hole where it was designed to go. So I think unless you have a running back there or a receiver that has run a ton of those plays, they're probably not even looking for that hole to find a way to get those 2 yards. So Prince Kali, yeah, I mean, I think the defense, I understand that it's kind of difficult because you're with what the linebackers Notre Dame had ahead of him were all experienced guys. So you could do a lot of complicated things with those guys, but then you probably couldn't do those same things with Prince Kali. So I think Notre Dame sort of struggled to find a way to get him in there. And I think especially the way they had to sort of account for the lack of JD Bertrand because of some targeting penalties, they weren't necessarily comfortable with totally putting Prince Kali in that role to play as an every down linebacker for Notre Dame. I think they're getting more comfortable with him playing. And it's sort of obvious the physical abilities they have. I think anytime we ask about him to Marcus Freeman or Al Golden, they rave about him. And the same for Jalen Sneed, who hasn't been able to see the field defensively yet either. That the future is bright for those guys, and they're making sure that those guys can understand what's being asked of them, because especially on defense, it takes that all 11 guys to make sure they're doing the right thing to prevent a 2-yard gain from becoming an 80-yard gain. So if you're not putting those guys in positions to succeed and they mess up, it can be very costly. So I understand more why someone like Prince Kali isn't playing at linebacker versus why Tobias Merriweather can't find a few roles. Although the thing that I was pointing to with Tobias is like, hey, listen, they put him out there and he didn't go in motion. Like, if you can't get the pre-snap stuff right, how can we trust you to get the post-snap stuff right? So I think that was part of the frustration there with getting Tobias Merriweather more action. And Tommy Rees indicated, like, hey, we have things in the offense for him, but we just haven't had those situations that we felt were right to use them. But I think now that we've seen him in that situation, it's going to be harder to keep him hidden. And fans will probably only get louder if his role goes back to what it was in the first few games, because the talent was certainly on display there for Tobias Merriweather. All right, that's all the questions we got, Eric. What you want to get back onto a few of the other things we talked about? We don't have to go through everything that we wanted to get to, but I'll let you choose which direction we want to go next.
Well, I think everybody knows the bottom line. We've hammered that pretty good. Sure. So we won't go through all the stats there. Let's look at in the trenches, a weekly look at our offensive line play. I don't think that they had as good a week as they've had leading up to this. I don't think it was a bad week necessarily, but they were going against a defense that they should have dominated. As we kind of look at who did well, Joe Alt and Blake Fisher had pretty good games. Zeke Correll was one of Notre Dame's top-rated players from the offensive line offense, period. Jarrett Patterson didn't have a real good game, which is surprising for him, and you wonder if that foot was acting up for him. But, the offensive line is such a big key in what Notre Dame's able to do offensively. And they gave up a couple of sacks, but, again, and the run offense was okay. It wasn't as dominant as it was, but I still felt like it was more a play call problem than an offensive line problem at times. How did you see it, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the offensive line played okay. I mean, I thought they were good to great in terms of pass protection. Drew Pine was pressured what I would consider like 4 times, I think was what I sort of counted. And that led to 2 sacks and 2 incomplete passes when Pine was pressured. The 1 sack, Blake Fisher got beat, and that ended in that defensive end forcing a fumble on Drew Pine. So that no one is to blame besides Blake Fisher in that scenario, in my opinion. He's got to be better there. The defensive lineman certainly made a nice pass rush move to get around him. So you just sort of have to tip your cap to the defender in that scenario. The sack on the final drive, I thought was more on Pine. He sort of stepped into the pressure. He stepped up and then started to try to roll to the right, and that sort of allowed the guy that Blake Fisher was blocking to sort of disengage from Blake and be right there to tackle Drew Pine for the sack. And certainly you have to avoid a sack at all costs in a 2-minute drill when you don't have timeouts. The run blocking, I didn't think Notre Dame did a great job of, but I also don't like sort of like what you mentioned. I don't think they were put in a lot of great situations. Stanford was loading the box and making it difficult for Notre Dame to do what it wanted to do. Certainly, if we're talking about the offensive line, Jared Patterson's false start to start the game was not a good way to set the tone. Now, I think that might have been as much Zeke Correll's fault as it was Jared Patterson by the way it looked. But and like I mentioned earlier, I was very I don't really understand the what I thought looked like a draw call on the first play of the game. That was very strange to me. I did want to highlight one play. And I had this in my notes, and then I think right before we started recording, Pete Sampson actually tweeted out the video. There was Audric Estime's touchdown run. Joe Alt made a block. That was pretty special. He sort of moved the defensive end out of the way on the left side of the line of scrimmage, and then the safety is going to come fill this massive hole that Joe Alt helped create. And he sort of makes sure he gets in the safety's way and sort of bumps him to prevent him from coming through the hole to get to Audric Estime, and Audric Estime just bounces outside and scores the touchdown as a result of that. So Joe Alt essentially took care of two guys without having to leave the first guy he was blocking. So that was pretty special there. I think certainly Audric Estime deserves some credit for reading Joe Alt's block in a way that allowed him to do that. So overall, I thought it was a decent game for Notre Dame's offensive line. It wasn't a dominant effort I think that was what was expected against the Stanford defense that isn't exactly great against the run. And hasn't necessarily been getting after the quarterback at a great level either. So I would say it's probably below the standard that Notre Dame's offensive line expected, but I don't know that they were necessarily the reason Notre Dame lost either.
One thing I'll mention about the offensive line, the Lombardi Award had its mid-season watch team. It's 90 people. Notre Dame had 4 guys on there. And Lombardi goes to just about anybody that's not a running back, wide receiver, quarterback, or defensive skill player. It can be an offensive lineman, a tight end, a defensive lineman, or a linebacker. Notre Dame has 4 guys on that list. It's Michael Mayer, tight end. They have Jarrett Patterson, offensive guard, defensive end Isaiah Foskey, and defensive tackle Jason Adamalola. I really think Joe Alt should have been on that list. I think other than Michael Mayer, he's had the best season through the first 6 games of any Notre Dame player. Pro Football Focus going into the Stanford game had him as the top left tackle in the country so far in terms of their evaluation. So that's the end of our In the Trenches segment. I think we're going to jump ahead to questions lingering because I don't think there were any questions answered that didn't have the word execution in them on Saturday. And it was funny because Pete Sampson and I both thought we counted up the times that Marcus mentioned that word or a form of it, and we came up with a different number. So Pete's probably better at math than me. I had 27. He had 23.
So it was a lot either way, regardless of what that number was. In terms of the questions lingering, I think the question that I had was, will this offense ever find a sustainable confidence? I think to me, it was really shocking that Notre Dame's offense could be that bad against a not great defense after looking so good in the previous games. Like that was surprising to me. Drew Pine looked unsure of himself. It seemed to me that Tommy Rees was unsure of himself as a play caller. And it just didn't necessarily reflect the confidence that you would have assumed that this Notre Dame offense had. So it's making me question whether or not Notre Dame's going to be able to find some sort of confidence, some sort of faith in its identity that it can stick with for the rest of the season.
Yeah. Tommy Rees took a pretty good beating on our message board. And when I was kind of perusing that, I saw I was taking a beating from one guy who called me a church mouse. He said that that Tommy Rees was, I don't know, that I was a big fan of his. I want to be fair to Tommy in the criticism of him. I went into the year saying this is going to be a really defining year for him because he doesn't have the handbrake that Brian Kelly is. He doesn't have the safety net that Brian Kelly is. So I'm not saying that that's a positive or negative, but I mean, he's got big aspirations to be a head coach or be a guy in the NFL. And he also wants to do a great job while he's here. But when you look at the offensive numbers, and I have them on my legal pad, they are 80th in the country in total offense. That's not getting it done. And I think we could look at the reasons why, and there are some mitigating circumstances, but I think Notre Dame should be better than the 80th offense overall, even with playing a guy that was your second string quarterback to start the season, even with some of the offensive line problems that they had at the start of the season. I think Tommy Rees needs to be better, and I'll just leave that there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty confident in the way that we've covered Tommy Rees and his flaws and his strengths. So I think anytime things are going poorly, people also want to make it seem like we have some weight to bear for whether or not the coaching staff is coaching to the level that they think they should be. So
as I mentioned in my analysis, I checked for firemarcusfreeman.com, firetommyrees.com, and fireerichansen.com. Unfortunately, none of those existed yet.
Well, now that you said it live on YouTube, I imagine people are running to GoDaddy.com to reserve the rights for those websites. All right, Eric, let's start to wrap things up here. Can you give us a quick look ahead to what Notre Dame should be expecting when UNLV comes to town on Saturday? And for those who are hoping to watch the Notre Dame game, a reminder that it will be only on Peacock. So not exact. I mean, it wasn't a marquee game to begin with. And those who are not pleased with the way the season has gone for Notre Dame, and if they don't already have Peacock, I imagine it's going to be a really hard time trying to sell people to sign up for Peacock to watch this game on Saturday.
Right. Well, UNLV got off to 4-1 start. They were kind of a quasi surprise. They gave Cal a very good game. They lost to them 20-14. I think the biggest surprises have been on defense until the last couple weeks. And part of that is they've been without their starting quarterback, Doug Brumfield. He suffered a concussion a couple weekends ago in a 40-7 loss to San Jose State. He didn't play very much in that game. Cameron Friel came in. They've used Harrison Bailey a little bit, if that name sounds familiar. He's a transfer from Tennessee. And we still don't know if Doug Brumfield is going to play this week. He's listed as day-to-day as he's still going through concussion protocol. What he does different than the other two is he is a legitimate runner. He can extend plays. He can do the RPOs and really be a threat in the RPOs. He can scramble for first downs, and that's a big deal. They've played two really good teams in their conference the last couple weeks. San Jose State beat them 40-7. And Air Force beat them 42-7 without Brumfield again this past week. When you look at their numbers, offensively, they're okay. They're, defensively is where their strength was until the last couple weeks. So, I mean, Notre Dame's a 24-point favorite, which doesn't mean anything because they were a 17-point favorite over Stanford. I think this is a team that can hang with them for a half, and Notre Dame, that's why you got to emphasize starting strong, because you let these teams that are not supposed to beat you hang around for a half. Yes. It gives them confidence, and then it becomes difficult. Then you're not only trying to win the game, you're trying to get to how much you were supposed to win the game by in the first place, and then you're just struggling to survive. And I think that's what happened in the Stanford game.
All right. That sounds like a good preview to me. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in live or watching this on replay. Apologies.
But thanks for doing it twice.
Yeah. Apologies to anyone who had to go through our nightmare start, but we fixed the issue, and hopefully we don't have that issue again. Please subscribe to receive reminders for future live shows. We appreciate the live audience because then you can submit questions to us, and we really value being able to do that and getting answers to you guys as you submit them live during the show. So thank you to those who did submit questions today. Throw us a like and a comment to tell us what we got right or wrong. And next on the agenda for us is the Inside ND Sports Podcast, which we'll record on Tuesday. And then we'll be back here on YouTube on Friday with Place Your Bets predictions for the UNLV game. And there is always written content for you on InsideNDSports.com and plenty of discussion happening on the Insider Lounge. Have a good night.